Hello and happy Friday, and welcome to your video lecture for Module 5, the Public Writing Assignment. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to briefly review the schedule for the work and then cover the assignment requirements as well. So I've posted the material online already. Well, you have the schedule, and I just posted the assignment sheet. So it might be helpful to have it open for the first part of this, and then I'll give a little bit of a talk regarding my thoughts on it, some general tips after that. So, all right, actually, sorry, let's back it up and start with the schedule, the timeline here. So, the timeline for the public writing assignment is going to begin by Monday, when you have the incredibly demanding task of reading the assignment and posting any Q&As in the Q&A forum. So there's that. The first thing of consequence, of course, would be March 29th, Thursday, the analysis of public writing. So what we're going to ask you to do there is to go online and find an example of public writing and to offer a shortened version of a peer review letter. So essentially critique the piece as an example of public writing. And this is an opportunity for you to experiment with maybe a type of public writing you're interested in reading or creating later on. It's a chance for you to practice articulating the goals and stakes of public writing in different genres. And it's a chance for you to see what some published professional stuff looks like. And of course, I'm really excited to see your selections because as art, media, and design students, my suspicion is that you have a lot of experience with public documents and a lot of expertise in design. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with here. Getting ahead of myself, of course, the rough draft will be due Monday the 2nd, and then the peer review 2 days later, with the final draft Monday the 9th. So the shift with the public writing assignment, and now I'm going to look over at the assignment sheet, so if you have that file open, you might want to pull it up. We're continuing our module 3, 4, 5 trend here of taking the topic that we researched with our annotated bib and taking it and merging it into different genres that are geared towards different audiences with different needs, different mediums of distribution, different purposes in writing. I want you to think a little bit about each of those points I just made because they kind of matter when you're considering public writing as it compares, for instance, to professional writing. Professional writing, which you just finished, is writing that meets the needs of a professional reader. It's workplace writing. It's writing that you are reading out of a sense of organizational obligation. In other words, you have to read it because you are at work, and it exemplifies workplace values. Public writing is the opposite in many ways. We read public writing on our own time, when we're on the couch, on the T, when we're on an airplane, when we're sitting in a chair, wherever it is. Public writing is read not out of a sense of organizational obligation, but out of personal interest or personal benefit or something like that. In other words, your investiture in a piece of public writing is as a member of a self-identified public, not as an employee of Northeastern University or wherever else you're working. Similarly, academic scholarly writing is read and produced in the needs of a scholarly community to create knowledge, the discourse community. It's different than work writing, but it's again read from a certain position. So in my lecture for the last module, I mentioned it would be helpful to kind of think about the reader as like this discrete figure acting differently in different scenarios. I'd encourage you to do that once more here with the public reader. So the public reader will read something out of, again, interest or perhaps public obligation, a civic sense of obligation or community might be an interesting thing to consider. So the difference for our purposes, there's a couple. Once we have this kind of different reader imagined and these different needs imagined, what we have to consider is how does it look? So again, as CAMD students, this is where I think you are uniquely qualified to do some pretty exciting things. Public writing, of course, needs to get attention. Even novels have exciting covers, hypothetically. Its design is incorporated much more openly than it is in creatively is the word I'm looking for than it is in professional documents. Certainly more than in scholarly writing. So design plays an element here. Visual representation of information or data might play a big part. It needs to be appealing and also needs to be highly readable. Think about documents that work well. They're legible, they're visually pleasing, the narrative is engaging, and that engaging is a key word here too, because you're a member of the public here, so we need to maintain engagement. This doesn't mean, do canned tricks, but it does mean make it interesting. So to the point of the same topic that we started with the annotated bib, we're taking that topic and now we're writing for a public audience. In addition to the formal elements that are going to be a little more creative and open-ended here, but slightly more important too, you have to consider with the public document that we are now acting as an expert writing to a non-expert audience. I'll say it again because it's important. For the public document, your challenge is to convey discipline-specific knowledge to a non-discipline audience. So internal expert knowledge to external non-expert reader. You might think of this as the difference between a scholarly article on how to use CAD, for instance, or any other technical design program, and like an article in the newspaper or a widely circulated magazine on how this new technology is revolutionizing an industry. So that would be something that I know some of you sort of did with your professional writing. And again, you can do that same topic, but the challenge is you're no longer writing to someone in your industry, you're writing to someone in the general public, which means you have to show them why they should care. Because frankly, a lot of people don't care what most other people do at work. Go to any family Thanksgiving table, you'll probably find that. So it's that sense of obligation that you have to really understand. You now have to engage your reader. So you have to show them what's at stake for your topic, why it matters. You have to maintain interest, and you have to make the document visually appealing and pleasing and easy to read. One note I would add here, and this is the third paragraph of the assignment sheet, it's helpful to avoid the term general public because that doesn't really exist. Even the kind of broadest conceived publics share things like a commitment to civil society, hypothetically, or people who live in the United States. Obviously, even that's too much of a public to really constitute a single thing anymore. So it's helpful to think about it as something demographically maybe or geographically is a good way to think about it. So, for instance, your target audience might be post-grad young people who choose to remain residents of the city of Boston, right? What binds those people together isn't institution, it's not obligation, it's space, things like shared resources, perhaps a cultural interest, maybe civic obligation. That's jury duty, never mind. But you know what I mean by that. Or similarly, you might think of your audience as advertising is kind of a natural fit here, and that you're trying to carve out a market. So potential viewers of a show or a film would be a thing. But again, we're trying to translate an expert opinion here, which is a little different. So at any rate, let's go through the options again, which you'll notice are pretty similar to the professional writing. Again, I think that's useful because I don't want you to have to reinvent the wheel. I want you to focus on adapting it to a different audience with different needs. That's the goal of this course. So I don't want you to focus on reinventing the wheel. It's how do we make it more effective in this context. So the translation is, I think, It's kind of the most conventionally successful genre that most students tend to work in here. And it's easy because, well, easy. It's relatively straightforward in that the idea is there's a development in a technical field and you have to explain it to a public audience. Again, being sure to show them why they care. But it's a kind of logical way to be able to take expert information, for instance, on tax code, it's tax season, forgive me, and say, here's how this particular tax update impacts you, my tax-paying citizen. Sure. Um, the profile, again, we did this, a couple of you did this for the professional writing, and so you might consider adapting it. So, for instance, like a place like Northeastern will do this where they might be trying to curry um, goodwill in the community as they expand their real estate footprint and displace residents of the surrounding neighborhoods and drive up rents in places like Mission Hill. Not that that's a problem. They might be profiling their new hire who's going to come in and be a new neighborhood liaison and who's going to personally assist residents who can no longer afford to live near Northeastern with finding suitable housing relatively nearby. So you might profile that person and their qualifications and the outreach efforts they're making in the community. Um, I would encourage you again to think of this in terms of a knowledge specific person, an insider who has value to an outsider. How do we introduce them, present them, and make them engaging, interesting, relevant to a public reader? So you have to think about your own experiences as a public reader here and what gets you to read something when you don't have to. Well, normally you benefit from it somehow. Maybe it's entertainment value. Maybe it's a new 12-minute ab workout and you're going on spring break. Maybe it's an insider's tip on the hot new gadget that you need that'll revolutionize your life. All of those things require expert knowledge to be explained to non-expert readers in an engaging way. So you can see the kind of running strategy here that we're going for. Op-eds are relatively straightforward as well. Again, the challenge there is appealing to a reader's interest somehow, or at least sense of obligation. So it's helpful to kind of think of readership for the public reader in terms of what is their obligation in a non-institutional sense, or what might be their interests in a kind of demographic sense. I think that's a helpful way to break it down. An op-ed might be, for instance, why our schools should cut down on testing and increase creative projects, particularly in middle school years when neurobiological research shows adolescent brains are developing in radical ways. I don't know, I made that up, but you see the kind of trajectory we're going for here. Or I know right now there's a lot of reshuffling of higher education going on, so you might write an op-ed explaining why we should actually be investing in the humanities, fine arts, liberal arts, social sciences, because as data and technology is reshaping our material world and the ways we interact with one another, understanding human behavior, social structures, and means of representation is more effective than ever, more impactful than ever before. So that's another example of kind of op-ed that would be appropriate for this. Again, something to kind of, and that borders onto the campaign, of course, which is option 4. And these things all, again, they appeal to readers' sense of obligation somehow, their investment, their investiture in a place or a theme or an idea. Public writing is really cool because you can do a lot of neat things with it. And I'm also open to visually intense documents that you might make that might have a lower word count, but then you can comment on your choices and strategies you made in your author's note, which is totally appropriate for a public document, like really, really appropriate to do if you want to do that. So keep that in mind as an option. Go through and read the assignment. It's pretty specific and detailed, and I would encourage you to structure your author's note following the bullet points, for instance, that are on page 2 onto page 3, maybe showing some examples of your work and how it exemplifies those goals of the assignment. That would be helpful. In terms of submission, you do need to have 2 versions of this. The final formatted, designed version that appears as if it were circulating in public, and a Word doc fully cited according to the standards of your field. So this is for me as an outsider, presumably to what you're studying, to understand your sourcing, where you're getting information from, and your choices, hence the author's note, but also to see your final product, because a lot of public writing isn't fully cited, certainly not to the extent that scholarly writing is, and probably not even to the extent that professional writing tends to offer acknowledgments. So that's something you're going to have to consider too, which is how is citation and attribution of information used in this particular genre that you're working in. These are points to cover in your author's note. I will enjoy reading about them in your author's note because they will help me understand what you're doing. And that's how you're going to do this project. Like with the last unit, I'll go ahead and post some examples of some work I've received. I'll link to some sample projects that you might look at, just samples of professional like public writing that you can see to get a sense of. And if you want to bounce ideas off me, please go ahead and shoot me an email, send me a link to a page that you're like, hey, I like what they're doing here. I'd like to try to do this myself. How can I do it? Let me know. I want to be here for you. I've enjoyed chatting with some of you on Google Hangout, and I'm happy to exchange emails with you. So let me know what you're interested in doing. Go ahead and read the assignment, start browsing the web, think of the topic you're working in and how the public engages with it. For that analysis of of public writing, the thing that's due this coming Thursday, just post a link to it on your discussion board post, and then post your shortened version of the peer review letter. But it's really important that you include the link there so that I can see it, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to do that. So, do it. Any complications, concerns, questions, don't be afraid to be in touch. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch up next week. Bye-bye.